when the saints go marching in. Now, if being a saint means that you're a perfect person, then I clearly am not a saint. And with all due respect, I'm guessing that Walter probably wasn't either. I'm sure he was a very good man, but there are not many saints around. But as I understand, the good news of the gospel is that this good news was evidenced in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And it is that God calls us to be our best, but not to be perfect. God's love calls us to be our best, but surrounds us even when we aren't. That's why we know of another important song that says, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Now, wretch, by the way, doesn't necessarily have to mean an awful, terrible person. It can simply mean a person who is not perfect, who is not, in the classic sense, a saint. But then it says, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved someone who's imperfect like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see." And there's that great verse that says, "Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace has brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home." That's what we're here to celebrate today for Walter. That's what we're here to celebrate today for ourselves. All of us who are not particularly saints, but who are loved by God, are invited to come marching in and be a part of God's family. And that is good news today. And that's what we're here to give thanks to God for. We're also here today to give thanks to God for those memories of Walter, which you will carry with you. I have to be honest enough to say I didn't have the opportunity to know Walter very well, other than just meeting him briefly at the time of Virginia's funeral. Obviously, those of you in Walter's immediate family knew him very well and loved him very dearly. And Jim is going to come now and share with us those memories that we will give thanks to God for in the Word of God.
Glasses. Dad, Walter Whitbroad, was born on March 2nd, 1924. Passed away last Tuesday morning at the age of 91. He lived a long, full life, rich in those experiences that make life worth living. It's really hard to encapsulate and summarize or do justice to a lifetime such as Dad's in a few minutes or a few words, but in keeping with Dad's typical style, short, sweet, and to the point, I'll be brief, use a few words. He would have liked it that way. But actually, he would have really preferred that we dispense with the talking altogether and move on to the important things like food and beer, I'm sure. Dad was drafted into the Army in World War II and served in the 42nd Infantry Rainbow Division Band in Austria and Germany. After the war, he earned a degree in music from UNO and played in the band there, and taught music and band at Milford High for a couple of years before realizing that he'd actually much rather play the trumpet than teach it. He traveled all over the Midwest, playing for the Tony Bradley Orchestra for several years and formed several of his own jazz bands and combos. But sadly, over the years it became apparent that he was not able to make an adequate living that way, and so in the end, while still playing trumpet in several local bands and orchestras, he spent 26 years with Western Electric and before retiring. He married my mom, Virginia Nelson, on August 14, 1949. They would have celebrated their 66th anniversary just 4 days ago. Over the course of the next few decades, they had the unenviable task of raising me and my 4 brothers. Those of us who knew Dad for many years remember his trademark flat top haircut and jumpsuit era. For years, that was a fashion statement that defined Dad, and inexplicably he changed his look maybe 20 years ago, but that's the way many of us will remember him. Dad was generally a quiet man, a few words, but he had a great sense of humor. In contrast to Mom's extroverted and personality and kind of in-your-face slapstick humor, Dad was more introverted, and his humor was much more subtle. If you remember at Mom's memorial service last October, Dad told one of her favorite jokes, and in typical understated fashion, nailed the punchline. My brothers and I, Steve and Warren and Norm will get a kick out of it. He used to make up a wacky vocabulary of his own in kind of Dr. Seuss style. He didn't use words such as thingamajig, whatchamacallit, or doohickey. That was way too unsophisticated. He made up nonsense words and phrases, and our favorite was borrow fard meyer fond proliferator. He called his car a borrow fard meyer fond proliferator. I do not know what it means. But to this day, we call his car the proliferator. I don't have a clue what it meant, but he maintained his sense of humor until the very end. When I saw him, I got back in time to see him still. He was still with us. Just a day before he passed, he was on oxygen, propped up in bed, barely eating, barely able to talk, slipping in and out of consciousness. And I asked him, "Are you comfortable? Is there anything I can get you? Anything? Is there anything you want? Anything at all?" Not expecting a reply. I asked him again, "Is there anything you want?" And his lips barely moved. I heard him answer in an almost imperceptibly soft voice. He said, "Yes, I want to know what the square root of 3.4 is." He had many varied interests and hobbies. He loved to tinker, design, and build just about anything. If, for example, you needed an automatic toilet paper dispenser, you could trust that Dad would fabricate one out of 2x4s and plywood. And it'd be typically over-engineered, but it would usually work. He was kind of the original Rube Goldberg MacGyver rolled into one. Since he didn't weld, everything was made of wood. No wacky idea or silly contraption was too outrageous for Dad not to try to build it out of scrap wood. I remember the go-kart he built for us back in the 60s. The frame was made of oak. The seat was a bench from an old school desk. The steering wheel was out of an old wrecked Piper Cub airplane. The front axle was adapted from a Model T Ford. The engine was a Cushman Husky ripped out of an old meter reader scooter. This death trap had no brakes, no clutch. It meant when the starter rope was pulled and it started, it didn't stop until somebody pushed the kill button, and since we were young, small boys, we couldn't reach it. So we trusted Dad to run out as we raced by and press that kill button. He never let us down, but sometimes it wasn't until we had already run up on the curb and gouged out the neighbor's lawn with the wheels of Bonnie Iman. As anyone who's been around Dad for even a short time can attest to, he loved photography. He never went anywhere without a camera strapped around his neck. He had stacks and drawers and file boxes full of old negative snapshots and slides. The walls of our house have always been plastered with photos giving a visual history of our family and anything else that he might have considered a photo opportunity. He had a big box full of ridiculous looking hats, and I'm sure each and every one of us have been subjected to that.